Obama administration as economic policy and foreign policy, how it will come through. Can it work? Almost 2 months have gone by since Mr. Barack Obama took the presidential oath in the United States. Some say that Mr. Obama is the man of new century. The world, including Korea, has been awaiting for the unfolding of the economic stimulus as well as reform package to salvage the sinking U.S. economy, the worst economic setback since the Great Depression in the early 1930s. Recently, the International Monetary Fund forecast the world economy is likely to register a negative growth rate, down again from near zero growth rate forecast several weeks ago. Obviously, President Obama's position as a Democrat on an economic recovery plan from the unprecedented economic downturn is surely different from the traditional Republican stance symbolized as Reaganomics. Mr. Obama's stimulus package, is this big enough, and decisive enough, and effective enough? I observed that in recent months, U.S. private savings rate has turned to positive figures in years to cause a rapidly shrinking domestic demand. To what extent can any tax cut under Obama administration be implemented to encourage the private consumption in the United States? Some cynics are saying that Mr. Obama's economic policy is featured as American capitalism with some Chinese socialist characteristics. I don't know, Mr. Sorman, you agree with this point? Is U.S. Treasury Secretary Geithner's approach to resolve financial mess on the right path? Everybody in this room is extremely curious about when and how soon the U.S. economy is going to bottom out. Without any doubt, the Obama administration takes a protectionist stance compared to previous the Bush administration in international trade issues, suggesting that Korea-U.S. free trade agreement is seriously flawed against the U.S. interest. Under this environment, Mr. K. Sorman, is it still wise for the Korean National Assembly ratify the Korea-U.S. FTA ahead of the U.S.? Well, I'm very pleased to report that Korea-European Union FTA negotiation is to be concluded very soon. I thought maybe Korea utilize this forthcoming Korea-EU FTA to pressure for the U.S. Congress to ratify Korea-U.S. FTA. The export-dependent Korean economy is no exception to suffer from the world global economic setback. In the past 4 months or so, Korea's export performance has been declining at negative 25 to 30%. Over the same period a year ago, Korean economy would grow at minus 4% this year, according to the IMF forecast. Nevertheless, we have some but significant good news that in a recent few days, I observed that Korea's exchange rate seems to be away from extreme volatility. Maybe we may go downward trend, the exchange rate. In March, Korea is expected to record a biggest trade surplus amounting to $4 billion on a monthly basis, mainly due to sharply declined oil price. However, we are observing some worrisome development originated from North Korea. On the eve of launching North Korea's de facto upgraded missile system, South Koreans are now not sure about North Korea's intention on Kaesong Industrial Complex, located 15 miles north of DMZ line. What is the implications of North Korea by rejecting even the humanitarian food aid from the United States? In fact, this has been reported this morning paper. This morning, we are very fortunate and privileged to have a truly distinguished French professor, Sorman, with us, a worldwide renowned scholar and public intellectual in economics and philosophical matters, author of many bestseller books. Many Koreans and the world community regard him a classical liberalist. Am I correct on this? Right. He has been with us on several occasions. His columns and books are very well read by many Koreans. My students, in fact, carry your books in their pockets. I'm very much anxious to hear his views on Mr. Obama. Can it work? Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome him to the podium.
Mr. Chairman, dear Professor Ahn, dear friends, for me it has become like a ritual when I come to Korea to be invited to talk at your breakfast meeting. I had in the past years many opportunities to talk about various subjects. I talked about China, and also I talked about the United States, and probably I was too much optimistic at that time. But I make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and economists particularly do a lot of mistakes. And economists are very bad at predicting the future. And we don't know how to predict the future. But if I remember well what I said some years ago about the United States economy, and I will not change on this, that fundamentally the US economy is, and still is, in spite of the crisis, the leading engine of growth. And in terms of innovation, thanks to their excellent university, laboratory research, thanks to the excellent cooperation between academics and the business community, the United States has a lead since the beginning of the 20th century, and we don't see right now, in spite of the crisis, any real challenge which would modify this leadership. And we all accept it in a way. We like it or we do not, but we accept it because we all know that the whole world will get out of the recession on the very day when the United States will show the way out of the recession. There is no hope to get out of the present situation if the US don't do it first. So this is kind of a proof of the still leadership of the United States. And another paradox of this crisis is the strength of the US dollar. In a time of crisis, what do people want? They all buy US dollars. The US dollar is stronger than it ever was, and the whole world is buying US Treasury bills. This has consequences, as we will see in one moment, on the choices which have been made by President Obama. Because when you can print your own money, and when you can borrow without limit to the rest of the world, this gives you some kind of freedom that other countries like South Korea or France do not have. So this has an influence. This influence may be positive. It also may be negative in the long term. I have written a text for this conference in English, and I would like the text, if possible, to be translated and distributed into Korean in the coming days. Because it's a bit long and detailed, and I won't have time to go through all this text this morning. I will make some remarks based on this text, but if you're interested, I think the organizers are able to distribute the full text that I've written for you. as you started, and rightly so, with foreign affairs and the situation, threatening situation in North Korea, before I turn to economics, I'll make some very rapid remarks on the foreign policy of the United States. Very clearly, and I think this is I would consider it's a good thing. Maybe many left-wing commentators in the United States wouldn't agree with me, but the choice is clearly the choice of continuity. And this has been clearly said from the very beginning because the Secretary of Defense is the same and all the top military brass is the same. From the very first day, Barack Obama said that he would rely on the advice of the top military officers, and starting with General David Petraeus, who was in charge of the war in Iraq, and now in charge of the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan. This means that Barack Obama administration is not opening any debate on the role of the United States in the global order. The Obama administration does consider that the US as a nation and the US military should keep their role as a global peacekeeper, and that there is no substitute to the US military to keep peace in the world. There were some hesitation because among the Democrats you have some pacifists and you have some people who doubt the role of the US military, and they wonder why they should keep this huge 7th Fleet in the Pacific Ocean, why they should increase the number of American soldiers in Afghanistan. But this debate has become marginal. The 7th Fleet is here for good and for long, and the military presence in Afghanistan, another dangerous part of the world, is being reinforced. Vis-à-vis North Korea, I think it's very clear, following Mrs. Clinton's discourse and declaration, that there will be no significant change vis-à-vis North Korea, and similarly there will be no significant change vis-à-vis Iran. So the American policy will continue. It will be tough. I'm not sure it will be very successful because it has not been that successful since many, many years. But at least there will be no tendency to be soft vis-à-vis North Korea. I don't want to elaborate on this problem of North Korea. My position, I say that very often in Korean media, the key is not in Pyongyang, the key is in China. And as long as you don't find a way to deal with China, you will never find a way to deal with North Korea. But enough of that, because it's not our topic this morning. I just wanted to insist on the continuity of some enemies of the United States would say the continuity of American imperialism. Obama is an American imperialist. I mean, and imperialist, you know, the term, had been used for the first time by an American president in 1800, Jefferson. Jefferson said, America is the empire of liberty. So since the very beginning, the United States sees themselves as an empire with an imperialist vocation, but they see that as a positive imperialism, and they see the role of the military and the navy as extremely positive. And if I may add one remark on the US Navy, I was very recently visiting the headquarters of the 7th Fleet in Hawaii. And the Admiral Kitty, who is at the head of the 7th Fleet, told me the pride of the 7th Fleet is that since World War II, we never fought a war. And this proves how useful the 7th Fleet is. The Pacific Ocean is quiet. Trade can go on and off. It's because the US Navy is here. So Obama has no intention to change the role of the US Navy and US military in this part of the world. So I wanted to say that, which I think is quite significant, quite important, and I tend to think quite positive. If we turn to economy, You said in your introduction, and everybody agrees, that this is the most severe recession since 1930. It's severe, but it is not to be compared. It is not to be compared because, as you mentioned, I mean, growth could be negative this year or next year. But, well, it's not very pleasant to have a negative growth by 2, 3, or 4%. But it is not to be compared with the situation in the 1930s, where the production sometime in the United States or in Europe declined by more than 40%. And when we talk about unemployment in Europe, well, we live with 10% unemployment in a regular basis, but now maybe we'll reach 12%. That's not very pleasant. The US maybe will reach 8% at the end of the year. But once again, this has nothing to do with the situation in the 1930s, where half of the people in the United States didn't have a job. So we are not talking about the same thing. It is a recession, it is a crisis, it is not the end of the world, and it is not the end of capitalism. It is not a crisis of capitalism, it is a crisis within the capitalist system. And it destroys part of the wealth, it destroys jobs, it puts many people in a difficult condition, but also compared to the past, everywhere we have kind of welfare system which avoids people to fall into complete poverty. In Japan, in Korea, you have started to give direct help to the people, the poorest people more impacted by the crisis. And this is certainly the thing to do, to help the poorest people in order to save the system. In the case of the United States, there is no doubt that President Obama is very much in favor of maintaining the free market and capitalist system, and he repeated this on a very frequent basis because he has been accused, as you know, by the Republican Party to be a socialist. And to be a socialist in France, it's a compliment, but in the United States, to be a socialist is really an evil. So Obama has been very cautious to repeat that he's on the side of capitalism, he's on the side of the free market, he's certainly not a socialist, and everything what he does is to intervene by more state intervention, regulation, and we'll get into some details, in order to save the system and to have capitalism rebounding. Now some are a bit skeptical, some say that he's a kind of a hidden socialist, and I do personally think that he has no clear idea about economics, that's for sure, but he thinks that basically the system is good, the system is American, it's adapted to the United States, to the US culture, and certainly his ambition is not to change the system. Now, how is he doing if we go into some detail? We have to start with the stimulus. The huge stimulus in the United States is quite an ideological revolution in a way. Because it's true that since Reagan was in office, the market was supposed to adjust spontaneously, and that state intervention should be extremely limited. So this faith into the adaptability, automatic adaptability of the market, this phase to a certain extent with the Obama administration seems to have disappeared. And for good reasons. It's true that the monetary policy, which has always been advocated by the classic liberal, doesn't work. Even with a 0% interest rate, nothing happens. And so the classic instrument of the economic policy doesn't work. Therefore, what is left for the state is direct intervention by the stimulus, and also, we'll come to it in a while, direct intervention by the recapitalization of companies, industrial companies and finance companies. The problem with the stimulus is the following. First, if we look at economic history, no stimulus never worked. We don't have one example of a national economy which has been saved by the stimulus. What happens usually with stimulus, and many of them were applied in the 1970s everywhere, And as you know, in Japan, during 10 years, in the 1990s, you keep pouring money into the economy and nothing happens. And sometimes the economy recovers, sometimes it doesn't. But usually the recovery is not connected with the stimulus. Because very often the economy recovers before the stimulus reaches the people. So the connection between economic growth and economic recovery on one side and stimulus on the other side, the connection has never been proven. This doesn't mean that this time it will not work. One of the arguments of the economists who are supporting President Obama is that stimulus in the past didn't work because they were too small. But if you have a huge stimulus, a big shot in the arm, because of the very dimension of the stimulus, it will restart the economy. I'm not sure about that. Nobody is sure about that because, as you mentioned, what we see since the stimulus started, people increase their savings. They don't increase their consumption. Therefore, the stimulus increases savings, which aggravate the crisis. Because if people save, that means they buy less and less. And the production goes down, and it does impact countries like Japan or South Korea. The stimulus could have not only negative effects. I think in the short term, stimulus are neutral. I mean, maybe they create some jobs here and there, but maybe these jobs would have been created anyway. You cannot prove that. So basically, I think the stimulus has a political dimension. It is to show to the people that the government is acting, that the government is in charge, that we are doing something. From a classic economic perspective, the best in this kind of crisis would be to do nothing. But in a democracy, to go on a television show and to say to the people, my dear fellow Americans, I've decided to do nothing because this is the best way out of the crisis, I think this wouldn't go very far with the people. And also not in South Korea. So you have to act. So stimulus are neutral. They can create problems in the long run. Two kinds of problems. If you go on for too many years, like Japan did in the 90s, public spendings replace private investment. And there is now a consensus in Japan and among economists that the stimulus is okay for 2 years. 2 years would be a maximum. If you go beyond that, you create a new economic system where you have no reason to work, no reason to invest, no reason to invest. You just wait until the governments provide the jobs and the profits. So if you stay on with your stimulus too long, you really can destroy the engine of growth. And this is the advice with the Japanese government these days, because they have the experience. This is the advice they give to the Europeans and to the Americans. And at the G20 meeting, this will be the dominant discourse of the Japanese. If you want to avoid the lost decade as in Japan, better shorten the lifespan of your stimulus. The second risk in a stimulus package, as we know, is inflation. So far, the United States is protected from the threat, but they are the only one. Because of the reason we said before, because they use their own money, because they can borrow to the rest of the world, they can have huge deficits, 10%, the budget deficit this year, that no European countries, no Asian countries could afford. Because if non-American countries would be doing that, then how would they repay the debt? They would repay the debt very probably by inflation. And we know that there is nothing worse to destroy an economy and to disrupt a society than inflation. So the United States are using methods which may be good to the United States, at least in the short term, but which are valid for the United States only, and which cannot be copied by other countries. The second instrument used by the Obama administration, as you know, is direct intervention in the production industry and the financial industry. And once again, this is extremely ambiguous. Because if you try to save the auto industry, you do it because the auto industry, after a temporary stimulus in a way, the same kind of discourse, can they recover and adapt to the market, or they can't? The danger of this kind of intervention, like stimulus, that it will go on for years and years, and that the bailout for this kind of industry will replace good management and innovation. So in a way, you can draw a parallel between the global stimulus and bailout of industries. It's the same debate. You do it short-term to rekindle the growth and to allow people to adapt to a new situation, or do you create little by little a new economic system which becomes kind of a socialist system where dependence vis-à-vis the state replace economic dynamism and investment and innovation. Regarding the auto industry, I think that the bailout system will not help this industry to innovate and recover, and they are only gaining time. The question would be the same vis-à-vis the banking system and the financial institution. The US government so far, but it was already the case with the George Bush administration, has been unable to focus on the real origin of the crisis. The real origin of the crisis, as you know, is the emission of derivatives to a size which has escaped any control. Derivative as such is a good thing. Thanks to derivative, which is a good financial innovation, a better way have been found to do more risky investments in more risky countries. Without derivatives, China, for example, would not, or India would not have been able to find the necessary investment to sustain their growth. So derivative as such is a good thing. But they have gone too far. How far, nobody knows. And this is a real problem. We know that there will be no recovery as long this problem of toxic assets has not been solved. And the US government doesn't know clearly how to solve the problem. Why? Because it's not that easy. And it's not that easy because nobody knows what is the amount of toxic assets which is on the market. Nobody knows the amount, and nobody knows its values. So the US government, in a way, is gaining time, trying to devise system to isolate the banks which deserve to be saved and the banks which maybe deserve not to be saved. But they're in a process of evaluation, which I think it's extremely dangerous. Because nobody will never be able to evaluate the amount and the value of these toxic assets as long as they are not put on the market. Only the market can say. Of course, it would be extremely dangerous to put the toxic assets on the market because many banks could fail and many financial institutions could fail. So what? I mean, I think that they like for old industries, corrupt banks, and the financial institution, we were not able to manage their risks. They should disappear. There is no reason, there is no economic reason, there is no ethical reason to save them with taxpayers' money. Absolutely no reason. What is being done for AIG since several months is founded on no clear ethical or economic reason. The government talks about a systemic risk. What kind of risk? We don't know. And I do think that the Treasury Secretary, Mr. Geithner, should stop making contradictory statements on a daily basis and send contradictory signals. Because as long as he's not able to make a decision and to choose one way, the crisis will continue. And the trust within the financial system will not be re-established. And when you say that, and many columnists write about that in the United States, the reaction from Obama administration is to say, well, we have been here only since 2 months. which is true. But this was the first decision to be taken, and all the rest could wait. The stimulus could wait. The bailout of the industries could wait. But the way you manage the toxic assets cannot wait. There are other signals or policies in the Obama administration which are not that favorable to the business community, as you know. Raising taxes, attacking the ethics of the business community, criticizing the bonus system, condemning the immorality of the business community. The business community doesn't like that, of course. There is kind of a populist discourse which could have consequences in the United States. We don't know. It's not yet, it's too early to know, but there is this kind of a populist, anti-free market, anti-entrepreneur, anti-business discourses, which is something quite new in the US history, even coming from the Democrat, and we don't know where it leads. Another important aspect, and we turn to free trade now, is the commitment or lack of commitment from this Obama administration toward free trade. It is very ambiguous, to say the least. Very ambiguous. It's very ambiguous, I think, for the same reason that they are not able to make a decision vis-à-vis the banking system. The administration and the Democrat Party is very divided on this issue. The Democrat Party is not a unified party. It's a collection of individuals with very different views, from the most leftist to the most conservative view of the economy. During his campaign, Obama was very much anti-free trade. And we all understood that was a way to buy the vote in the industrial regions of the United States, like Ohio or Pennsylvania, which were decisive in this election. Since he has been elected, he's changed a little bit his position. Recently, when he was in Canada, he said that it was he had no more the intention to revise the NAFTA treaty between Mexico and Canada. This was part of his platform. He said that's over. So back to a more free trade classical position. But then on the back burner, there is the Colombia Free Trade Agreement and the Korean Free Trade Agreement. And then President Obama made, I think, a very dangerous decision. He said, this treaty, are they good or bad for the United States? We don't know. Let the people decide. And we'll have a big debate on the Korea and Colombia free trade. My God, I wonder what will come out of this kind of debate. Because evidently, you'll have strong lobbies and strong voices against this free trade agreement. And the consumer would be the main benefiter of the free trade agreement. The consumer has no voice. He's not organized. And so we are, and the United States will be in a position like in the 80s when the automobile lobby would oppose the Japanese car. But Japanese cars were popular enough among the US population that the lobby, the Detroit lobby, was taken over by the voice of the consumer. In the case of Colombia, will the consumer say, well, we want Colombian flowers and Colombian textile? They don't know it comes from Colombia. And I'm a bit afraid it is the same with Korean products. And they do benefit from Korean products, and a lot of them, but they don't know it is Korean, or they are not clearly identified as Korean. So I would suggest that South Korea would start lobbying in favor of the free trade agreement. Well, you should lobby in South Korea to start with if you want to avoid a new candlelight demonstration. So you have to explain to your own people the benefits of the free trade agreement with Europe and with the United States, and you need to lobby in the United States as well. This will not go like that. I mean, you just can't wait and hope for the governments and the public opinion to become reasonable. You have to work at it. And in the case of France or Europe, there will be no popular reaction against the free trade agreement. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe some industrial lobby will discover that there are a lot to lose with this free trade agreement. So I think South Korea should be extremely cautious with this free trade agreement with Europe, which will be announced and confirmed in London at the G20 meeting. And it will be a very strong signal to the world that South Korea and Western Europe are committed to free trade, and that in the middle of the crisis, the best political act which can be implemented is a free trade agreement. So this European-South Korean free trade agreement, it will be on April 2nd, if I remember well, is extremely important. It's a signal sent to the United States, but it should not preclude the South Korean government and the South Korean business community to be actively lobbying within the United States, and I say within the Korean public opinion. I should quote very rapidly some other aspects of the Obama economic policy, which I don't know if we should take them seriously or not. I mean, will it change the American economy and the global economy, or is it only discourse and rhetorics? I'm talking mostly about what's called green jobs and alternative energy. If you ask me, frankly, what is a green job, I don't know. If you ask me what is an alternative energy, I can tell you that it is an energy paid by the taxpayers. So I know what is an alternative energy. We don't know how far the Obama administration will go into this kind of a direction to support alternative energy and green jobs. I think this is pure rhetorics, and it will be a fad which will go away quite rapidly. Eventually, if I were to conclude on this, I will maybe repeat what I said at the beginning about the paradox of this crisis. It started in the United States, but it will end in the United States. It has shown the fragility of the United States economy, but it will not replace the United States economy by another leader, a group of leaders. It has shown also the ambiguity of the US dollar as a currency, which is completely unpredictable, but no other currency, not even the euro, is in a situation to replace the US dollar as a safe currency. Those are all the products of this crisis. We are at the very beginning of it. We are learning on a daily basis. I was talking yesterday night with Dr. Sakong-il, and we have to revise all our textbooks. Many things have changed. I mean, the Federal Bank in the US buying commercial paper, that was not in the textbook. We didn't imagine that it could be in the textbook. So we have to change the textbook. But also, we don't need to change principles. I think it's one of the risks of a crisis that people become, and you can understand, people become anxious, excited, frightened, and you can understand that. So there is a risk in a crisis that people in charge forget everything about what we learned in the past in economy. And you have in France, because France is a country where we love ideological debate, and the debate is, this is the end of capitalism, this is the end of the free market, and let's reinvent socialism, things like that. So people forget very rapidly basic knowledge. And this is why it's extremely important not to forget the basic knowledge and the basic principles. Korea has become a rich country because it was respecting some basic and strong principle. You shouldn't forget this principle and this knowledge because we're in a crisis. On the contrary, you must reinforce your conviction and this principle and not get into a stupid and useless ideological debate. But I regret that many economists, even many economists, forget their knowledge because they lose their sense, because they were not able to predict this kind of a situation.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think as usual, Professor Sorman really covered in a very comprehensive manner in such important issues ranging from North Korea to U.S. Economic policy package under Obama administration. I think I really learned a lot, and his remarks opened my own eyes. So I would like to share what I have observed as a highlighting point. I think number one, on the North Korean issues, Mr. Sorman said this whole issue rests on China, not on Pyongyang. And then second, I think he mentioned that U.S. Navy 7th Fleet on the Pacific Ocean helped us maintain a peace and stability. But I think this is clearly evident when we see a lot of this the happenings the African ocean.
Yes.
In fact, the South Korea sent a military warship the other day. And on economic matters, the point I really agree with him is that the stimulus package, there's no clear the empirical evidence that the stimulus package will help economy restore a sustainable growth momentum. Although stimulus package might help in a very short run, but nevertheless it should not be prolonged longer than 2 years, the maximum. Japanese evidence, clearly indicate this. And we might need also worry about the emerging inflation if we continue to use a stimulus package. And then direct intervention in industry and financial institutions on the part of the U.S. But I also agree with him that at this point, nobody really knows the amount and value of toxic asset in the U.S. And Mr. Geithner, keep making some contradictory statement, day by day. And then I think your point to me is quite enlightening. Raising taxes and attacking ethics of business community on the part of the President Obama create somehow the anti-business climate in the U.S. Implications of this still we need to watch. And on the trade issues, I think Mr. Obama takes a rather ambiguous position. But I think he really emphasized Korea should do its utmost effort to lobby U.S. the consumers community as well as the congressional leaders to ratify the Korea-U.S. FTA. And also, I'm so glad that when you mentioned that G20 meeting, Korea is going to announce a conclusion of the Korea-EU free trade agreement. I think this will send a very powerful and robust message to the world community that Korea and the European Union is determined to pursue a liberalized trade regime despite ongoing economic recession. And so I think we should be very proud of what we have achieved, and Korea should commit ourselves to maintain this free trade agreement. And then finally, I think this paradox that all the issues, global recession started out in the U.S., but should be ended in the U.S. Nobody can replace the U.S., and no international currency can replace the powerful strength of the U.S. dollars. I think bearing this in mind, I just really want to highlight some key points which I have not thought of that way. But thank you very much for your very insightful comment on this. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me open the floor, and you can raise questions and provide some comments on what Mr. Sorman is stating.
Monsieur Sorman, merci beaucoup. Votre présentation, excellence. May I ask two questions in one comment?
Sure.
First question is so-called Obama's foreign and international politics policy. The Obama advocates change, and he insists that the soft power will be supersede the hard power. But soft power that is not supersede to hard power. That's my point. World War I, World War II, the French soft power is supersede the Nazis, but the Nazis invade France. That's a typical example. So maybe, don't you think Obama's soft power policy will change in due process of his tenure? That is the first question. Second question is economic one. Obama administration put some rescue money. Recent rescue money is 2% of GDP. But I met world-class financier, you know that Rothschild, Japan, one of the CEO, he told me that Japanese put 20% of GDP throughout 10 years. It took 10 years. Obama put 2%, and summing up, total bad debt loan rescue money is around 10%. As a scheme-wise, that's not enough. More money put in the market so that the U.S. economy will recover. And the third is my comment on U.S.-Korea FTA. I went with all my pocket money, went to University of Memphis in 2007, and also went Long Island University, heart of the Brooklyn Center, 2008. I made a special lecture on Asia and financial and economic integration with the special interest of Korea-US FTA. Originally, the class is confined to 20 students, but gathered 200 students and 20 faculty members to listen to this one. They are much concerned about this Korea-US FTA because their job opportunity, they are poor and obscure, or middle class or lower middle class. They think that FTA is beneficial for them, but Obama and rich and famous people against this Korea FTA, only quoting that Detroit lobbyist. So don't you think this FTA, like Colombia and Korea, will eventually will pass in U.S. Congress or Korean National Assembly? What is your opinion? That is my comment.
Soft power, the Obama foreign policy and military policy basically is exactly the same as the George Bush policy. But you cannot say that. So therefore, they came with these ideas that it's not the same policy because they put more emphasis on soft power than on hard power. So this was a way, to show that there is change without change. But you are perfectly right. I mean, the soft policy anyway cannot be implemented by a government. So it's like a cosmetic rhetorics to hide the fact that there is continuity. Concerning the stimulus, I mean, we talked about it. I mean, there is a debate, and it's an open debate still within the economists, going back to the 1930s. You have economists like Krugman saying, well, it didn't work in the 1930s, it doesn't work now because the stimulus is too small. and it should be much bigger. How big, we don't know. If it's too big, I think there is an underestimation of the inflationary risk. And maybe I'll come back to that later in more detail, but at the very beginning of the crisis, there is a loose monetary policy. And if we go back to a loose monetary policy, we not only we don't solve the crisis, but we repeat the very reason for the crisis. Now, will the FTA with Korea be approved in here and there? I think yes. I think yes, because if you look at the whole history of free trade on the long run, you always have vociferous groups against free trade, but eventually there is like a common sense which triumphs, and eventually most of the free trade agreements have been approved in all the countries where they have been presented, except maybe in the 1930s. But since World War II, all these agreements have always been approved, even if it takes time.
Thank you very much for your sharing your good wisdom. A while ago, I have two questions. One is that I want to ask quote some pessimistic view on this recession and ask your opinion. And second question is as to US dollar exchange rate. One article I read these days says that one of the strong reasons why we have this much recession is that the U.S. has too much debt, credit debt. Credit debt of America, both of combining public sector and private sector, is now 350%. It's at $51 trillion. That's as of June last year. And it further says that past 100 years, America's credit debt is 155% of GDP, and during Great Recession time, it was 256%. When the recession was over, it came down to 130%. Then my question is that, and this guy further says that to really recover, the only solution is that Americans, they should save more and spend less and pay back their debts. That is a only long-term solution. That's my first question for your comment. And second question is that despite of such big American debts, that the U.S. dollar is getting stronger. And I think the reasons is that the U.S. is getting the benefit of as a key trading currency status. And once this financial crisis is over, and then people will get away from the horror on credit risk, then and all the governments will have a stimulus package and issue debts. Then all around the world we will have inflationary pressure. And that pressure will be more stronger in America. Then the scenario could be that American interest rates will go up and exchange rates will precipitate. But I want to have your comment on that. Thank you.
And one other paradox is to say that when the recession will be over, the US dollars will go down. Because we'll have less reason to invest in a safe currency. But those are only hypotheses, because if there is one thing that we cannot predict, is the evolution of the currencies. We have no mathematical model which is really safe to predict this kind of behavior. But probably I do agree with your scenario, but we could have some surprise. On your first observation, you said the long-term solution would be for the American to save a little bit more, and yes, to a certain degree, because as you also say, we need America to have debts. There is a right level of debt in a way. When they start saving, like now, they don't buy. So they should save, but not save too much. So what is the right level of debt if they have no debt at all, they are not the engine of the world economy anymore. If they have too many debts, they put everything into a recession. But if they don't have enough debt, they also put us in a recession. So there is a kind of a right level of debt which is very, very difficult to evaluate. And this relates directly to the interest rate policy of the Federal Reserve Board. And what I like to add on this, if we write the history of the current recession, it really started with a too low interest rate after 9/11. Of course, in a crisis, it's always a combination of different parameters. There is not one reason why we have a recession. But I do consider that the leading reason, in spite of the huge respect I have for Mr. Greenspan, and what he did, he was overshooting after 9/11. There was such a fear after 9/11 that the global economy would stop, that everybody would be frightened and trade would stop, investment would stop, that the decision, as you remember, after 9/11 by Alan Greenspan and the Federal Reserve Board was to lower the interest rate to rekindle the economic growth. And at that time it worked. But it worked that well that the Federal Reserve Board didn't feel that they had to raise the interest rate at a certain moment. They didn't do it because there was kind of an enthusiasm in that period because of the very high growth rate in the United States. Everybody was making money, the whole world was growing. But on top of this loose monetary policy, which made credit available in the United States for everybody at a very low rate, on top of that, you had a huge influx of foreign capital from Russia because of very high oil prices, from the Arabic country for the same reason, from Japan, some from Korea, and from China. So the US financial system was really flush with money, and with money at a really nearly 0% rate. And the speculation was a consequence of this loose monetary policy. Because today, the main political discourse is to say we were too greedy, we had too many speculation, and of course the bubble burst, and this is why we are in that situation. But you have to ask yourself, why was the speculation possible? Why did the people become greedy? Why were they ready to buy to Mr. Madoff the pieces of paper with no value, bringing a 15% interest a year? It's because when a society is flushed with money, when there is no more notion of what an interest rate is, and greed, I would say, is normal in any society. But the fact that greed can do anything, this is because of the superabundance of money which took place in the United States. And I think it's not greed, it is loose monetary policy which is at the origin of this crisis. And it would be extremely disastrous that in the name of stimulating the economy, once again there would be too loose a monetary policy in the US.
I'm Kim Hwan from Sunday. My question is, in the case of the French Revolution, the court was in heavily indebted, and the meeting of General Estates was convoked, and there was a revolution. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but do you think bourgeoisie of nations would rise against the United States? And do you think, I think the US hegemony will not last forever, at least it will have to be revised. So what will be the role of Obama presidency in that evolution of US hegemony in the world?
First of all, this hegemony has been decided by nobody. In fact, it's just a consequence, an outcome of history. And in the United States, you know that there have been always a lot of dissenting voices on the role of the United States as an empire. And still today, you have many voices in the academic community or the political community saying, but why should the US be responsible for the rest of the world? And it happened like that. I mean, it has not really been a choice. I think this is important, I mean, that the United States became an empire nearly by accident. The Roman Empire wanted to build an empire. The Chinese emperor wanted to build an empire. The United States became an empire. It never had been really a choice. And therefore, there will be no debate within the United States where the Americans will say, well, after all, we don't want to be an empire anymore. So the two things can occur. First, will there be kind of an anti-American revolt? And, well, we have that on a local basis and from time to time. But in case of the Obama presidency, the charisma of Obama protects the United States, I would say at least for 4 years. Obama as a person has such a charisma and is so respected around the world that his own person protects the United States. And I don't see any violent anti-Americanism demonstration nowhere in the world in the coming years as long Obama will be president. And the third observation you could make is that we are in an economic integrated system. And you need a kind of a global government. And so the question is, what will be this global government? Will one nation replace the United States? Clearly, in the short term, the answer is no. No nation has the economic resources or the political desire to be the global cop for the world. It costs a lot of money. The Chinese, they don't have the economic resources, neither the military. The Europeans, they don't have the will. They are not interested, okay? Good life first. We don't want this kind of global responsibility. So there is no nation willing to, replace the US, and you need a global cop. I mean, if the Seventh Fleet disappears, who will replace the Seventh Fleet? Nobody is voluntary for that. But what we will see probably is the emergence of a sort of a semi-global government. The G7 will disappear. I'm quite sure that the G7 next meeting in Italy of the G7 will be the last of its kind, and that the G20 will replace for the years to come the G7. So you have kind of an enlargement of this kind of a global government where the United States remain the leading voice, but mitigated by the strong presence of other countries. I think this is the direction in which we are going. Nothing as dramatic as the French Revolution, to use your metaphor.
My name is Sal, working for a Korean language newspaper. About 5 or 6 months ago, you came to this breakfast lecture, and you said it was just after the financial crisis broke out in the United States. And then at that time you said that you firmly believe in the fundamentals of American financial system. In the initial, in the beginning part of this morning's lecture, you said that you made mistakes. Does these mistakes mean your mistakes in predicting the development of American financial crisis? And do you still believe the fundamentals of the American financial system? This is my first question.
Yes.
And second, these days American news media report that there are differences in the financial crisis in the 1930s and last year and this year. A few days ago, American TV reported that many people are living in more wealthier state than in the 1930s. So when there might exist some differences between the crisis in the 30s and these days. So, but by the way, I'd like you to elaborate on how many differences there really are. But I'd like you to quote some differences in the depth or profundity of the crisis. Thank you.
Okay. I regret you were there last time and you remember what I said. And after this breakfast conference in Seoul, I said to myself that I was a bit too enthusiastic and I would have been more cautious. So I made relative mistakes, I would say. My mistake, but I think it was not only my mistake, was to underestimate the seriousness of the financial crisis, because I didn't know, but very few people knew at that time, that all the banks and financial institutions all around the world were loaded with toxic assets. This has been discovered, as you know, little by little. At that time, we didn't have the information, and it was believed that the toxic assets problem was a problem of some leading institution in the United States. But after getting rid of this institution, the rest of the world was clean. And then it has been discovered that there was not one bank in the most remote country which was not loaded with the toxic assets. So this has been discovered little by little, and as we said before, we still don't know today. We still don't know today how far, because it's hidden. So not only we don't know the value, but we don't know the dimension, and we discovered that we have derivatives based on derivatives. It's an endless process. So that was my big mistake, based on the lack of information. And one of the lessons I think that we should retain from this is not that we need more regulation. Everybody talks about regulation, but the financial market was already heavily regulated. Mr. Madoff was under control, and the regulation was there. So the problem is not the lack of regulation. The problem is elsewhere. And the problem is the lack of information. I compare the toxic assets sold and bought by the banks to medicine. When you buy a pill, if you are severely ill, you buy a pill. You know it can cure you, but maybe it can kill you or have bad consequences. But at least it's written down on a piece of paper, or the medical doctor will explain to you what are the benefits and what are the risks. In the financial sector, I think the solution is not regulation. It is information and transparency of information. The states should intervene not to add regulation, because they will be incapable to apply the regulation. They will be evaded, or if the regulations are too strict, they will kill innovation in the financial sector. So I think the way out is really transparency of information, so that we know ahead what we are going to buy, and we didn't know 5 months ago, and this is why I was wrong in underestimating the depths of the recession. Now, very rapidly about the other fundamentals, what I said, if I remember well, and I repeated that this morning, that what I mean the fundamental in the long run, which is the capacity for innovation, the capacity to bring very rapidly an innovation to the market, the capacity to attract the best research from all over the world, the good cooperation between academics and business, and the entrepreneurship, and all this is still there. There is no equivalent still today of the United States as an economic engine, and in the long run, in the long run we are all dead, but in the medium run, I'm quite sure that the United States will know a spectacular industrial renaissance. When you go and visit the United States labs, industries, you are impressed by all what is going to happen and transform the industry in the coming years. everything which has to do with the science of life, biotechnology, nanotechnology, this takes place everywhere. But it will be marketed first in the United States. So I think that in spite of the crisis, we are on the verge of a kind of a new industrial revolution. And that all the new products and the new techniques are there. And that this trend towards innovation has been disrupted by the financial crisis. But when the financial crisis will be over, all the new products, methods, techniques, services, they are already ready. They just wait for the right financing and restart the economic process. We have to remember that the growth of economy is always innovation. There is no other growth of engine like innovation. This is why I should say that the fundamentals are still okay. In one word, the big difference between 1930 and today, in the 1930, 2/3 of mankind lived in agriculture and in a way was protected from the crisis. In a country like France, for example, the crisis was bad, but not that bad, because in the 1930s, 50% of the French people still lived in agriculture. So the impact of the crisis was moderate. It was much stronger in Germany because it was a more industrialized country. So these days, even agriculture is impacted. So because the agriculture is on the world market. So the big difference today that everybody is impacted, there is no shelter, there is no place to hide. This is a big difference. Another difference is that most of the countries have a welfare system. Therefore, the impact of the crisis doesn't create, or not everywhere, maybe in Africa, countries like that, but the recession doesn't destroy the life of the people to the same extent as in the 1930 because of the welfare state, because of state intervention. And finally, I think the big difference is that we know more about economics today than we knew in the 1930s. Many of the huge mistakes which had been committed in the 1930s, like closing the border, okay, and forbidding in the United States the creation of new companies, imposing monopolies. At that time, it looked like the right thing to do. Today, we know there is a progress in economic knowledge. We know that those were mistakes. So there have been a huge progress in economics knowledge, and this helps tremendously not to aggravate the recession and not to repeat the mistakes of the 1930s, like the New Deal, which has been an aggravating factor of the recession.
Well, I guess we have about 12 minutes or something like that, and if nobody has any further questions, I would like to take the liberty of the chairmanship, raising a couple of questions. Can I do that? If you allow me, I'll just go ahead. Okay. Incidentally, Mr. Professor Sorman, the Secretary Rubin was here, I believe, about 4 weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, to participate a global seminar organized by the Korean government to celebrate the 1 year anniversary of the Lee Myung-bak administration. He's in fact the culprit of all this current and the financial crisis, and inventor of all this repackaging, constantly derivatives. What he said was that, he has never made any apology, okay, to make such a financial mess. But he said that he didn't recognize implications of such a constant repackaging of financial derivatives and many variables coming together. So I think you said you didn't recognize, this implication of this. So maybe all the economists perhaps are on the same boat. And
right.
I myself, maybe economic profession, in a sense, I really felt the regret. Nobody was able to predict the consequences. So we are on the same boat. First question, Korea-US FTA. Now, Korean National Assemblyman, the government party as well as opposition party now weighing, U.S. Congress and the U.S. reaction as well as stance from Obama administration is ambiguous, not known. Therefore, our National Assembly almost ready to rectify, perhaps sometime March this year. But the opposition say, hey, wait a minute, we are not sure, how the U.S. will move. But my own position is that I think despite such ambiguity from the U.S. side, Korea should go ahead to ratify first, and we should throw our own tennis ball to the U.S. Congressional court. That is my my own view. So I would like to hear your view on this. And in fact, you said this Korea-EU FTA will provide a very good position for Korea to project our image for liberalize the country in the whole community. So with this together, I think Korea National Assembly should ratify first. And second question, you said that Korea should lobby, very hard, especially U.S. consumers do not aware of this a brand name of the Korean product. Okay, how can you approach this? How can we deal with the U.S. consumers advertising Korean product? I mean, of course, Hyundai Automotive Company using this precious time during the Super Bowl game to advertise its own product. That's one way of doing this. But what is general approach to enhance Korea's product image to the U.S. The consumer, the society? And the final question, you said this while the crisis going on, and we should prepare the post-crisis system, and we should search for a new, the robust new growth engine. In this context, I think Korea has now serious problem. We were a pioneer in the stem cell research, but unfortunately we had this Dr. Hang Woo-seok scandal. In terms of the ethics of a scientist, and as a result, Korean government suspended the expenditure of the budget to carry on stem cell research. But however, President Obama signed a couple of weeks ago, to go ahead with this stem cell research, and for that matter, UK and France and Germany are now really on the hot race to encourage stem cell research. What is your view? Korea has made a substantial progress on the biotech and nanotechnology and stem cell research. We should allow, I think, this resumption of the stem cell research is partly pioneered by Dr. Hang Woo-seok. I would like to hear your views on this.
On the what Rubin says and the responsibility of the economists, and I think the economists should take an oath like the medical doctors, the Hippocrates oath, and the first line is you should not harm. And sometimes we invent product very sophisticated, and we're absolutely delighted because it's that sophisticated, and it makes a wonderful mathematical model, and we do forget that it can have consequences. But we also do models which are quite useful, and we have done models to show that free trade was good. We have shown models to show that inflation was bad. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but we are not very cautious. And the economists behave like scientists. They don't know how to communicate, and they don't relate very well to the people. They are not very good at explaining themselves. And so the profession as such these days is thinking very hard about the kind of behavior it should have, because after all we do have a collective responsibility, because we are at the origin of certain products, and these products can be toxic, and we never thought about it before. Well, I consider Rubin to be much more toxic than I am because he's more creative. But still, there is an ethical problem within the profession, and it is being taken into consideration right now. And this ethical dimension, I think, will be in the coming years added in the curriculum of economic science. About free trade, I mean, as I said in my introduction, it's not because we are in a crisis that we must forget the basic principles and everything what we know about economics. We know that free trade is good. Of course, we know that it does impact certain people. It's good globally. Individually, it can destroy jobs. But this is the responsibility of the national government to help people who are impacted by the free trade agreement. So I think it's very important to keep the principle and to be careful about the negative consequences of these global benefits for certain categories of people. The big mistake would be first to forget about the free trade agreement for circumstantial reason. And the second mistake would be to forget that what's good globally is not good for everybody. And this is a big problem because the adversaries of free trade will always be better at public relations than the advocates of free trade. He would have communicated better on the benefits of this free trade agreement. So you should not repeat the same mistakes which allowed the opponents of the free trade agreement and have another candlelight demonstration. And to lobby the United States, lobbying the consumer, the South Korean president a couple of days ago has created a committee to promote Korea as a brand abroad. Apparently, I am the author of this brilliant idea, but I'm completely unsatisfied with the way it is done. Why? And sorry if I shock some of you. The president, he brings a committee of 10 or 12 wise men together. And these wise men decide to promote Korea abroad. And they decide that they should put Taekwondo first, I think. Kimchi came second. And, well, there was a list of 10 good things about South Korea which was to be promoted abroad. This is not a good method. The good method is to go maybe through professionals, a PR agency, and ask the Americans or the French, what do you want to know about South Korea? What is your image of South Korea? What are your prejudices about South Korea? What do you expect from South Korea imports? And you have to start from the demand. You have to start from us and not start from you. So I think I was very happy to have a committee taking care of promoting Korea as a brand. It's a good thing. And I was a bit surprised by the method. You know, it's like if Hyundai or Samsung decided, well, this is the best product. I don't want to know what the US consumer wants. He will buy my car. And that's a bit the way this brand promotion committee is starting. So I hope that they will change and that they will ask the US consumer what they will expect and then build a PR campaign which will be targeted toward these countries, and each country being different, by the way.
Before
Yes.
moving on, second question, and could you answer my question on the Korean National Assembly should ratify Korea-US FTA, given the?
Oh, no, of course not. I think I answered. I think I answered to that from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, no hesitation to have. I mean, you should follow your path. I mean, this is a long-term trend. Man, you shouldn't be stopped by circumstances.
Okay, very good. I think Korean National Assembly, despite such strong opposition from the many politicians, we should do our utmost effort to ratify Korea-US FTA as soon as possible. And second question, the stem cell research issues.
The what?
Stem cell research.
Oh, sorry. No. I think as I tried to, as I said before, I mean, the economic growth is based on innovation. And there is quite an agreement to say that the innovation in the future, the leading industries will be biotechnology and nanotechnology. And Korea had a clear advance. And okay, there's been an accident, but there are accidents in all countries, anywhere. And you should restart as fast as possible, because you have the facilities, you have the researchers, and many of the researchers went to the United States after this, and you have to bring them back. You have to bring them back.
Good. I think he provided us a enormous, this direction guideline to resume the stem cell research even after the Dr. Ham's scandal, and he further commented that we need to bring Korean scientists from the U.S. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think this morning, I have been benefited a great deal from his penetrating views and the very insightful comments and very comprehensive analysis, complex the world economic affairs as well as which direction Obama administration is heading to. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking him his truly valuable contribution to this breakfast session.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.